Great. Well, it's 11:01, so harsh as it may seem. I might get going, and if there are other people who are clicking in, they can catch up. So good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's wonderful to have so many of you joining us for the launch of Fitzroy Legal Service's Prison Law Handbook. Before I begin, I would, of course, first like to acknowledge the rightful owners of the country on which we're coming to you from, who are the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and also the rightful owners of the country that you and the audience are all streaming in from today. We pay our respects to elders past and present and to all First Nations people joining us today. Sovereignty was never ceded, and it does feel important to acknowledge that we're all very lucky to be part of a community here in Victoria where we are witnessing a treaty become formalised for the first time ever in this country today, in fact. And of course, today, as we have a conversation about key issues across the prison rights space in Victoria, I want to foreground that First Nations communities are disproportionately affected by our carceral system, and that First Nations justice is shamefully really tied up with decarceration. And I want to pay my respects to all of the incredible First Nations advocates in this sector working tirelessly to see change. Now, a little bit of housekeeping. The agenda for today should be up on your screen very shortly, and we will be wrapping up by midday. There will be some time for questions at the end of both of our how-to section and also following our wonderful panel discussion that we will have about halfway through. So please use the Q&A function to ask questions, and we will endeavour to get to your question. Please keep your microphone on mute as usual for the duration of the webinar. And just noting that today's webinar will be recorded so that those who were unable to attend today will be able to watch it in the future. Now, first up, we will be hearing a short welcome from Francesca Lee, who is a member of the wonderful Voices for Change, which is an incredible hardworking self-advocacy group here at Fitzroy Legal Service by people with acquired brain injury and lived experience of the criminal justice system. So I will hand over now to Francesca.
I'm a member of Voices for Change. Voices for Change is a self-advocacy group. We work to make people's journey through the justice system fair and equal for people with acquired brain injury. The handbook will help people have a voice in knowing their rights and enable them to hopefully understand their situation more clearly. I hope that as many people in prison as possible find out about this, and it is equally shared around in Victoria. The handbook is a great idea and resource. I hope that this is something that will make prisoners and people with disability have a stronger voice and understand that they are a person, not just a number.
Oh, sorry, everybody. I've taken my my instruction too literally and kept myself on mute. That is embarrassing, and I do regret it. And I should say at the start, I think I also neglected to say who I am. So my name's Hamish McLachlan. I'm the CEO here at Fitzroy Legal Service. And thanks to people who are just joining us, and thank you so much, Fran, for that those kind words, and very well put. So today marks a very exciting milestone for us with the launch of the Prison Law Handbook, a comprehensive, user-informed, accessible online resource designed for people in prison, their families, and the professionals who work alongside them. It is a one-of-a-kind resource that will give people in custody and their families a clear understanding of their rights in prison and the process by which they can access these rights. The Prison Law Handbook is the culmination of years of hard work. The need for the resource was first identified through the prison advocacy program, which started at the mighty Darabin Community Legal Centre and continued at Fitzroy Legal Service after our merger in 2019. And of course, many of you will be familiar with FLS's iconic General Law Handbook. So creating a Prison Law Handbook seemed like a natural step, and I hope it's fair to say it's a beautiful child of a fantastic marriage. The resource responds to a significant gap in accessible legal information by bringing together practical guidance about prison rights and complaints pathways to support more safe and humane conditions for those who are incarcerated. This level of direct access between people in custody and legal information about their rights in prison is unparalleled, and we hope it gives those in prison and the sector that supports them a way to enrich their potential for both self-advocacy and systemic accountability. The resource was made possible by the participation of prison law experts, as well as lived experience groups who have allowed us to ensure the resource covers the most important areas of prison law and will be practically useful for those inside. And on that note, I want to say a huge thank you to all our external expert reviewers across the sector, many of you here today. Thank you also to past and current Fitzroy Legal Service staff who have worked so hard to see this resource come to fruition. Also, I'm not sure if there's anyone from Gaydon's here today, but they were very involved in some of the early drafts and research. So thank you to Gaydon's, and in particular to Cass Martin, who really led the work at Fitzroy Legal Service early on. Thank you to the lived experience experts who shared their stories and expertise with us in the development of the resource. And thank you, of course, to funders of the project, to include Victoria Law Foundation and also DJCS, and also to DJCS and Corrections for working with us throughout the development of this resource and for making it accessible to those currently in custody. Can also just note briefly that the current version is the starting point, and we intend to include further information in future, for example, information specific to LGBT prisoners. While all areas of prison law are important, the current version reflects the most common areas of legal need that we were seeing through the advice line, and also what was recommended by lived experience experts. And the demand for this information was so high that we decided to publish these now, and then we'll add more specialised information down the track. I'm now going to turn to FLS's Community Education and Engagement Officer, Gabby Besby, to share some information about accessing and using the resource before we get stuck into a panel discussion. Over to you, Gabby.
Thank you so much, Hamish. Today I'll be giving you a quick overview of the new Prison Law Handbook, how it's structured, why it matters, and how people in custody and staff across the prison system can easily access and use it. The Prison Law Handbook is a comprehensive, plain language guide to prison law in Victoria, written and published by Fitzroy Legal Service. It was developed in consultation with people who have lived experience in custody to ensure that the information is accessible, accurate, and relevant. The handbook explains key legal processes and everyday issues that shape life inside prison, things like healthcare, discipline, visits, complaints, and parole. Each chapter includes practical examples and step-by-step guidance, so readers can clearly understand what to do, who to speak to, and what options are available when issues arise. Before I go further, I just want to note that the Prison Law Handbook is designed to provide legal information and doesn't serve as legal advice. We know that access to legal information inside prisons is often limited. Many people in custody can't easily contact a lawyer or get clear advice about their rights and responsibilities. The Prison Law Handbook helps to close that gap by giving people reliable, up-to-date legal information that they can use to navigate systems safely and confidently. For professionals, it serves as a shared reference point, supporting consistency, transparency, and better communication across the prison system. For people inside prison, the handbook will be available virtually through the Offender Services Network, which is the internal computer system used across Victorian correctional facilities. Prison and program staff can also assist individuals to find and use it, which is particularly valuable for people with low literacy or limited computer skills. For people outside prison, including families, community workers, and legal professionals, the resource is freely available directly on prisonlawhandbook.fls.org.au, or you can access it through our website by typing Prison Law Handbook in the search bar at fls.org.au. Once you've opened the handbook online, you'll find it structured for easy navigation. The contents page links directly to each topic, and the index at the end allows you to quickly look up keywords, handy if you only remember part of a topic's name. The online version also includes a search bar, so you can type in terms like healthcare, visits, or complaints and instantly find relevant sections. Throughout the handbook, you'll see step-by-step instructions, scenario examples, and contact details for support services. You can also print sections you refer to often, read examples to understand common legal or procedural issues, and also share links with colleagues and peers, support workers, or family members. These features make the Prison Law Handbook a practical, everyday tool, not only for people in custody, but also for staff and the community supporting them. While the handbook was created primarily for people in custody, it also benefits prison staff, administrators, and service providers who work closely with people in custody. Having access to accurate, consistent information can reduce misunderstandings, prevent conflict, and support smoother day-to-day operations. Ultimately, the Prison Law Handbook is about positive engagement. It's not about challenging correctional staff, it's about ensuring that everyone has access to the same reliable information. By clarifying rights and processes, we reduce confusion and create a more transparent system, one where expectations are clear on both sides. This contributes to safer environments and supports better outcomes for people in custody and staff alike. So to recap, the Prison Law Handbook is a plain language guide to rights and processes inside Victorian prisons. It will be inside prison via the Offender Services Network and outside via the Prison Law Handbook website. It supports both people in custody and professionals and communities who work with them. We encourage everyone here to explore the resource, share it across your networks, and consider how it can support your work. If you'd like more information, training, or simply to provide us with feedback, please reach out to us and we'd love to hear from you. And if you've missed anything, a video resource explaining how to navigate the handbook will be sent out to all attendees after this webinar. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll now hand it back to Hamish to introduce our panel discussion.
Grant, and I think, in fact, Gabby, we're going to give people the opportunity to ask any questions. So if anyone has any questions, please just put them in the Q&A tab on the meeting. But as we do not have any so far, I will get to our panel discussion, which I'm sure many people were drawn to the webinar today to be able to hear. So while the handbook is a valuable tool to support people to understand and advocate for their rights, its publication forms part of a broader conversation about imprisonment in Victoria, systemic issues that affect people inside, and the need for community-based alternatives to incarceration. To ground our discussion today, it's important to acknowledge the current landscape. Across the state, we continue to see rising rates of incarceration, including particularly for First Nations people and women. Carceral legislative approaches, including the ongoing impacts of Victoria's bail laws as reformed recently, and the just announced and highly concerning changes to the youth criminal justice system. And we're also seeing worsening conditions in prison, including routine lockdowns, harmful reliance on solitary confinement, barriers to emergency management days, and reduced access to connection with family and community. And to discuss all that today, we are joined by sector leaders, advocates, and organisers who work at the front lines of these issues and see firsthand their profound impact on the daily life of prisoners and the broader community. Just a reminder to please pop questions in the Q&A tab on the Teams meeting platform, whether it's about the law handbook itself to what Gabby just presented, or also questions to our panelists. First up, I will, of course, introduce our panelists, and it's a great pleasure to do so. Just noting, unfortunately, Joe Schoenfelder from Val's Wirraway team was unable to join us today as planned. As you'll appreciate, there's a lot going on in that space, but we have three wonderful panelists nonetheless. First, we've got Monique Hurley from the Human Rights Law Centre, who is a principal lawyer focused on police and prison accountability work. She's acted for families in coronial inquests, including the family of Yorta Yorta woman Auntie Tanya Day, and works alongside and with lived experience to challenge mistreatment and demand systemic change. We also have Kelly Flanagan, who's from the FIGJAM collective, which is a peer-led group of formerly incarcerated women, trans and gender diverse justice advocates. Kelly is a First Nations artist, author, and lived experience advocate whose work amplifies the voices of women, trans and gender diverse people in prison and calls out the systemic harms of incarceration. And finally, we've got our very own Sophie Jest, from Fitzroy Legal Service. Sophie's a senior community outreach lawyer working at FLS's St Vincent's Health Justice Partnership to assist community members with complex psychosocial and medical needs as part of an interdisciplinary team. And she's recently expanded her practice into prisoners' rights through our Prison Legal Service. Sophie's practice is guided by their strongly held principles of abolition, harm reduction, and community care. So turning to our questions now, over the past year, we've seen a renewed surge in so-called law and order rhetoric shaping public debate, including the introduction of harsher bail laws that are driving more people, including women and First Nations people, into prison. And as just mentioned, we've seen some very concerning information about the direction that is planned to be taken in relation to the youth justice system. So perhaps turning to Monique, you first. In this climate, what strategies can meaningfully redirect momentum away from carceral responses and towards community-led supports and solutions?
Wow, what a question to kick us off. Thank you, Hamish, for having me today. It's a real privilege to be on the panel, and I'm zooming in from unceded Wurundjeri country today. Thinking about your question and particularly the context that we find ourselves in at the moment with the state of Victoria really experiencing like an ongoing mass imprisonment crisis where the government seems really prepared to throw people under the bus in order to serve their political interests. It's a time where I think that we all really need to be coming together and mobilising to push back against that kind of narrative. We've seen this week the Allen government really prepared to condemn, generations of future children to a really bleak life behind bars with the adult time legislation that they are proposing to introduce into Parliament that'll see children as young as 14 subjected to adult prison sentences. They'll be uplifting from the Children's Court to the adult jurisdiction, and they're also removing the principle of imprisonment as a last resort. And I think that this, again, just presents an opportunity for everybody working in this space and for people with lived experience of being subjected to these really horrific and barbaric systems to come together and work to challenge the government on that and really push what the evidence says and what, I know that in the panel and most of the people zooming in today will know is that the evidence is really, really clear that really regressive law reform doesn't make communities safer. It actually undermines community safety by pipelining more and more people into a prison environment where they're subjected to really horrific treatment. There's no ability for that system to perform any kind of rehabilitative purpose. And so I think really pushing for us to work together, think really creatively about the different levers that we can use to create change, and being really ambitious in our asks and our thinking about reimagining what those systems can look like.
And in terms of those levers, I know this kind of approach that you've just touched on, treating children, you know, as adults. I know that HRLC was successfully involved in responding to a kind of a variety of that kind of policy some years ago now, when they sent kids to the Barwon prison, and that was a legal response. Is that one of the tools that might be available? I know that the similar approach taken in Queensland, which this seems to be aped from, has been declared to be inconsistent with various international human rights instruments. So are there, as well as what you're talking in terms of coalition building and momentum building with the public, are there legal tools that might be available to stop this?
Yeah, I think strategic legal action is definitely one tool in the toolkit that can be used to push back on really regressive reform. I think that the challenge with really using the law as a tool to try and fight the law is that we are often stuck with the legal framework that we find ourselves in, and it can be really, really challenging. In terms of the example that you spoke about in Queensland, they suspended the operation of their own human rights laws up there in order to pass their equivalent adult time legislation for children. And I think that the announcement this week about the laws in Victoria really does call into question Victoria's compliance with Australia's human rights obligations internationally, and potentially Victoria's own Charter of Rights and Responsibilities Act, which was a tool that was used in that Barwon litigation that you referenced to get the children out of Barwon prison at that time. But I think that strategic legal action, a reflection that I have from working in this space for some time now, is that we really need to be thinking about how we bring people with us on the journey, because strategic legal action can be really, really powerful and create change. But then that's always something that can be undone by the government, future governments. And I think we really need to think about how we can change hearts and minds and cement that in practice beyond just strategic legal action.
Yeah, absolutely. And can I bring you in, Kelly? I'm interested, as a lived experience advocate and someone who's, you know, been inside, like, what is it like for you and maybe for other people in your situation when you see this kind of atmosphere, this sort of rhetoric about like villainizing people who have been criminalized?
It's so harmful. I think coming into contact with the justice system as, you know, I was 30 at the time, that was harmful enough. I just can't understand how a child can be put in that situation and expect to learn from it and then come out respecting the same system that harmed them in the first place. I don't understand that. I just think that is completely the opposite of what we want. We want to show them love and care and a sense of community. And we can't do that if we're putting them in conditions that are like horrifying. And as we know, with the way things are at the moment, it's not just imprisonment. You're talking about putting people inside cages with no contact with other people because there's no staff to do that. So you're locking them inside boxes with no support. As an adult, I can share that my experience was incredibly harmful. I'm still dealing with some of that stuff now. And I just am unsure what that looks like for someone so young. I don't, no good can come from that. Absolutely no good.
Yes, very well put. And what about you, Sophie? I'm interested. You work, as we said, at the front line. You're working in people who are in very disadvantaged situations, who are presenting in acute medical services at St. Vincent's. I wonder, and various of them will no doubt have interactions with the criminal justice system. When you see this kind of rhetoric and it's couched in the terms of we need to have consequences so that people don't offend, or you see the bail law reforms, which is sending people into bail and therefore not able to get the medical care that they might be able to receive in the community. How do you see that playing out in practice? Is it actually effective?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not. And I think that that's the whole premise of us wanting to unpack this with principles of decarceration and abolition. We actually know that, as Kelly said, locking people away in a cage actually does not help their rehabilitation. It doesn't help change making, and it doesn't encourage people to be able to find community. It's the opposite. Oftentimes in my work, the first time that I even know that somebody has gone into custody has been when they're not answering their phone. I don't know where they are, and then there'll be a alert on the St. Vincent's system that they've suddenly been received in prison at a health service there, and that will be my first time that I'll know, why they haven't been to court or why they haven't made an appointment with me. And then I've had a client who just this year actually was in custody and then eventually was released on time served. And I saw him both before and after. And you could just see, I mean, his medical needs weren't addressed in prison. You could just see physically the toll that it had taken on him. And then, of course, his legal need that I was assisting him with before he went into custody, then you then have you're losing housing, you're losing, sometimes you've got issues with Centrelink, all these other than issues pile on. And so you're coming out of custody, having had that traumatic experience of being isolated from community. And then you've also got all these other legal needs on top of that have it just snowballs for people. It just doesn't work.
Mm. And while the long-term goal, as you touched on, is to shift away from carceral responses entirely, we also must address the urgent harms experienced by people currently inside, and that's, of course, the purpose of the Prison Law Handbook. And these include an increasing use of prison lockdowns. So lockdowns are ostensibly intended as short-term emergency measures that can fine people to their cells for extended periods, but are now occurring with alarming regularity. And at the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre, which is a women's prison in particular, reports of prolonged lock-ins, limited access to programs and education, and disrupted medication schedules are widespread. These conditions have serious consequences for people inside, including their dignity, mental health, connection to community, and their prospects for rehabilitation. So again, perhaps starting with you, Monique, can you tell us about why these lockdowns are taking place so frequently?
Look, I would love to know why these lockdowns are happening so frequently. I don't know that the government has even really ever publicly admitted it, and maybe Kelly knows. But we understand that it's because they can't staff the prisons, or that's what they say is the reason, is because there's staffing issues, and so they're unable to adequately supervise everybody that they have in their custody. And so that means that they have to lock down the prison. We've heard lots of really concerning stories that they, lock down the whole prison for a day so that they can attend like a CPD event and do training and do different professional development things, which is like great for them to be doing, but not at the cost of subjecting people to a practice that can amount to solitary confinement and torture. But I think Kelly's probably got more to add on that than me.
Yeah. So Kelly, you've spoken in the media. I've seen about the severe impacts of these lockdowns. So what can you tell us about the ways in which these conditions are affecting the daily lives of people, and have you heard like what the justification is for it?
Yeah, so I just want to give a warning, like I will talk about like, suicides and stuff like that. So it's just prior to going into that. And I feel, for those of you who have seen the interviews, I was very harmed when I came out. So I was very passionate to say the least. But these lockdowns are like I can't even explain to you the impact of people, of women, that what it's doing to their mental health. We've got women who are in there who have been falsely identified as a perpetrator and is actually a victim. So they get put into this prison environment. So they're already not an offender, but are being seen as an offender. And then you have that isolation tactic where there's the lockdown. So you've got a victim in a space where they shouldn't be, plus you've got these extended lockdowns and they're not used to this type of, no one's used to this type of environment. And they physically see that the only way to escape this environment is to end their life. And I really want to emphasize, like, we're not talking about, like, we're talking about somebody literally cutting their throat. Like, these are the things that are happening. Like, I know that sounds really vicious, but I really want to share with you what's really happening. And I don't want to sugarcoat that. And the thing is, or what I'd also like to touch on, is that before the new management took over, before the new, there was no lockdowns. We didn't have any staff shortages. There was no lockdowns. So what we have is new management coming in, and all of a sudden we're being locked down for massive periods of time. Now, I'm not a scientist or an academic, but if you put two and two together, the issue we have is it's not really a staffing issue, and we already know that. Like, we know that there's, officers unhappy with the situation or the new rules of new management, and are trying to fight back, and that's why we're having the lockdowns.
Yeah. And
About this, yeah.
And it stands to reason that the more people that they're putting inside, if it's true that they have workforce issues, that's not going to get easier, and we're going to see more of these situations, no doubt.
Yeah, and it's not a staffing issue. Sorry, Monique, it's not a staffing issue. They say let's employ more officers. That's not the issue. The issue is the officers don't want to work there, under the current management or whatever it is. Yeah, sorry, Monique.
No, I was just going to add to what you were saying in terms of, I think that really reveals what is going on, and that's the attachment of prison authorities to tools like lockdowns and solitary confinement as a way to exercise their power and control people and to make them feel small, to put them in their place, and it has a really dehumanizing impact.
Absolutely. And I firsthand experienced a lot of that, being an advocate inside and not afraid to speak out to whoever would listen. And most of you are aware, like, that was everybody. I was not, but there was consequences for that. Like, there was severe consequences for me for that. I don't regret any of that stuff. But what I'm saying is, on top of those lockdowns, I also suffered other punishments for speaking out about the lockdowns. So, if it really is a lack of staffing, why are we being punished for speaking out about the lockdowns? And that is still happening, by the way. There are still women being punished for speaking about the lockdowns over the phone.
I think also, just following on from you, Kelly. Well, sorry, Hamish. I think just your personal advocacy is so incredible, because your work around bringing light on the experiences that you had in prison, I think is then, I mean, for example, for me, that was sort of the first time that I had actually heard the true extent of the lockdowns, even as a lawyer in the sector. So your work in that way has made a massive difference, I think, to what we're all here. Of course, no, it's huge. And I think that just it goes to show lived experience, like the power of that advocacy. And I think, but then it also goes to show, as you've said, like the personal toll that you've experienced, not only in custody, in prison, but then also continuing in your life now. It just goes to show, I mean, both your power, but then also the impacts of being in custody.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you.
very well said, Sophie. And so I guess a question for the panel, what do you think could actually help to fix this? Like, it's not an issue that people, I think, in the general public would know about, right? Like, people don't hear much about what happens in prison. It's out of sight, it's out of mind, it's literally behind a wall. What can be done to help fix these kind of punitive responses to people who are already being punished?
I'd like to touch on that. I've been looking at other alternatives from an Indigenous perspective. So I know in other parts of the country, men's business is starting to look like, men that are involved in the carceral system or have, but they're being put out with mentors on country. And they're still doing the time that's required, but they're doing it in a way that's culturally safe. So they're spending time out with Unc on property or on country, and they're going through, what it's like to live in this society today as a man of a Western world. So what that's doing is some of us don't have that experience with the normal upbringing, so to speak. So some of these men, they don't know how to treat their children or their partner, or they don't know how to be So they've been taken out on country with Unc, and they're learning these skills of how to be a strong, a man for their family, and just learn how to, love their culture and connection. And I really like the idea of that. Women's business and men's business for us is just such a powerful thing. And a lot of the time we don't have these skills. It's not we're blatantly not wanting to, act in a certain way. We just don't have these skills. And I feel like, I don't know how the other panelists feel, but I just found that method of working in a harm reduction kind of way. I just thought that was fascinating, and it works because these people haven't reoffended. So,
and I think that's what it is, Kelly. No, it's like, as you say, it works. And it's this idea of bringing community in, not shutting someone away from their community.
Yeah.
And I think that idea also too, like we know the harm that is being done by the prison industrial complex, and then it's like, what can we actually, because I think decarceration and abolition is not just about what we don't want, it's what we want instead and what we can create. And we have all these amazing tools, and what an incredible thing, especially from having on land that is First Nations land, that idea of having that solution is incredible. It's something that's also part of decolonization as well,
Yeah, and it's like being part of, rather than being the problem, which we're generally told, like, you are the problem. It's taking that away, and it's saying you're not the problem. The system is the problem. But what we want to do is we want to have you spend some time with Mob and learn about that culture and our way of life. And I think that's a lot of food for thought. Like, these things are possible.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And it just brings to mind that really heartbreaking phrase that was in the statement from the Heart, right? Where they said, we know the statistics about Aboriginal people being so shamefully disproportionately impacted by incarceration. I think in Victoria it's something like 15 times more likely to be inside. And in the statement from the Heart, they said, we're not an inherently criminal people, and I think that's what you're getting at. And so we should be able to design systems that reflect everyone's humanity. So we've been talking about lockdowns, but it's not the only form of sort of punitive prisoner control, I guess. Another thing that we're seeing is the use of solitary confinement. So where lockdowns confine whole units or prisons to their cells for large portions of the day, solitary confinement sees individuals placed alone in a cell for 22 hours or sometimes even more a day with very little human contact. Monique, can you speak to us about the types of harms that are caused by solitary confinement and the particular cohorts of prisoners that tend to be most impacted?
Yeah, of course. Solitary confinement is a really brutal and barbaric prison practice that causes irreparable harm to the people that are subjected to it. People who have been subjected to it describe it as torture, and that's what it is. In terms of it's recognised in international human rights law that indefinite or prolonged solitary confinement, so more than 15 consecutive days, is a form of internationally recognised torture, and that's strictly banned. And we have the problem in Victoria where overly broad laws and insufficient safeguards permit a number of prison practices that can amount to solitary confinement, including the lockdowns that we've spoken about. And that's something that's been evidenced over and over again by people like Kelly speaking out. There's been, a bunch of independent investigations by the Ombudsman, government reviews, the Cultural Review into prisons, more recently. And it's particularly detrimental to people with disabilities and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are overrepresented in prisons because of their mass incarceration. And that was something that was pointed out by the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody over 30 years ago now. I think that, the handbook is going to be a really useful tool for people in prison that are being subjected to practices like solitary confinement, in understanding their rights and possible avenues for reviews. But also, I think, connected to the point we were just talking about, Hamish, in terms of thinking to the future and what's possible, it's really a different way is possible. We do not need solitary confinement as a prison tool. I think that corrections often conceptualize it that way, and it's a tool that they've always had to exert power and control over people, and they want to retain that ability to do that. But I saw that in America, there's moves to abolish solitary confinement in a lot of jurisdictions, and recently there was an End Solitary Confinement Act introduced into Congress over there to prohibit the use of solitary confinement in federal prisons to create alternatives, and separation was going to be capped at 4 hours. So I think that's a really interesting development, and something for us to bear in mind when it often feels like there's not a lot of scope to achieve progress. There is.
Yeah, I mean, shocking if we're behind the United States in terms of prisoners' rights, right? Kelly, if you don't mind sharing, were you subjected to solitary confinement during your time inside?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Again, it was used as a form of punishment. So for me, speaking out about the lockdowns, there was several issues that were made up for me to receive lockdown periods. So without any proof of the so-called offence, just the officer's word, and then I would be moved to solitary confinement. And we're talking about solitary confinement for 2 weeks. We're talking about 7 days, 2 weeks. We're talking about there was periods of time where I was in Swan 2, which we all know was horrifying. I was down there for 4 months, and that was due to that wasn't because of punishment. That was because there was no beds available for me to go to a unit. Yeah, so I find that really, really interesting that it is used as punishment, even though it's prohibited to do so for long periods of time. It is still just a basic practice.
And what's that like? Like, what's the impact like if you have so little human contact for such an extended period of time?
Well, we know, we've seen the results of a solitary confinement and what that does to the human mind. One, you start imagining imagining people are there, you have conversations, your mental health goes down, you start to believe what your mind is telling you. So you start going a little bit, a little bit crazy. When I was in there, I was so paranoid after being in there for a few weeks. I stopped eating because I thought my food was poisoned. And this is, I'm not taking any mind altering substances. This is just purely from spending so much time alone with no human contact and no ability to use the phone. So, the paranoia is incredible. Like, I have never suffered from that, even when I was in active addiction. But going into solitary confinement literally broke my mind. And that's the aim of it. The aim of it is to break your behavioral patterns, to break your mind, to break your ability to be strong and stand up for yourself, to conform to a prison ideal and restructure you. That's not humane. Nothing humane about that. And we've got so much research around what solitary confinement does to people. I don't know why we're still having these conversations. It blows my mind.
Yeah, and during that time, did you have any access to advice or legal information or anything that could help you?
No, 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 no. And because you can't access the phone either, there is a phone in there, but you need to be approved to go out and use it. And if you're not well, like you're paranoid and you're not behaving the way they want you to, they won't let you out to use the phone. So that can go on for days at a time. So no, you have no access to any of that stuff.
And I'm interested, Sophie, what does this bring up for you? You've worked at the intersection of both mental health and criminal law and also prisoner rights law. Like, what does this bring up for you hearing that?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about, Hamish. I spent some time in a previous role working at Thomas Embling, and a lot of people had been transferred there from other prisons, and just the way that you then can see consequences that are, I would consider them to be punishments then for people experiencing symptoms of mental health as a result of isolation, as a result of lockdown. And then next minute, they're then sent over to the psychiatric locked facility. And then that is then medicalized. I have taken instructions from so many people at Thomas Embling who gave me so many different very, very alarming pieces of information about the way that they've been treated in prison, including in solitary confinement, and then the impact that had on their mental health, which then led to them having to access extra care, but then often in a very harsh and sort of like a stigmatized way as well, even then just within the prison system. It was very alarming.
Yeah. And if we can just move from these measures to the concept of emergency management days, my understanding is they are meant to compensate for having been subjected to these sort of measures. But maybe, Monique, could you just explain to the audience what is an emergency management day and what's happening in relation to them in practice? What are we seeing?
Yeah, sure. Emergency management days are a form of kind of sentence remissions where people are eligible for deductions off their sentence of imprisonment to account for being subjected to harsher than usual prison conditions. There's a long history of sentence remissions across Australia and in Victoria, often connected to when people who work in prisons taking industrial action, and then that causing the prison to have to lock down because of the inability to staff the prisons, and then the government really, rightly responding by saying that people in prison who are subjected to that kind of treatment should be compensated for that. At the peak of the COVID pandemic, there was a lot of emphasis on emergency management days because of the particularly egregious, conditions that people were subjected to. And there was a process put in place where people could access emergency management days automatically, and you know that worked well for a lot of people. It definitely wasn't a perfect process by any stretch of the imagination, but following COVID, there has been less appetite, I would say, for correctional authorities to grant people emergency management days, even though conditions are deteriorating, for the reasons that we've spoken about and what Kelly has said about what she was subjected to in particular. That should warrant someone being able to get emergency management days, in my opinion, and based on the law. But there is a real reluctance on the part of corrections to do that in any kind of systemic and automatic way at the moment. And I think that's because that would force them to reckon with the fact that they are subjecting people to these practices really, really regularly.
And what role do you think the Prison Law Handbook could play in this kind of situation? There's a great chapter on it in the Prison Law Handbook. Will that make a difference?
I really hope so. I think that the Law Handbook is a really good start in terms of helping people in prison be able to access legal information to help exercise and enforce their rights. I think that, you know, it's really, really hard for people in prison to do that generally, given like what Kelly was talking about, the power imbalance between the guards and the people in prison is really significant, and they can often control a lot of access to the phone, to information. There's a lot of deliberate withholding of information in terms of the reason why someone might be subjected to isolation, separation, lockdown, solitary confinement, whatever you call it. And so that can make it really, really hard for people to assert their rights. And so, yeah, hopefully the handbook will help people be able to do that a bit more, understand how they can request information, what information should exist for them to try and access, understand the emergency management day framework and how they can make an application pursuant to that. But I think also it would be really great to see a dedicated legal service for people in prison to assist them with accessing their rights. And that's something that we are really keen to pursue, and it's something we're looking into trying to build the case for at the Human Rights Law Centre at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So Victoria's one of the few states or territories that doesn't, as I understand, have a dedicated prison law service. Of course, we have our small contribution at FLS, but it's nowhere near funded to provide it full statewide service. There's VALS has its We're Away programs, but it's specifically for First Nations people, and there is Victoria Legal Aid does some work, but not so much on prison law specifically. So there is a great need there, and there was a recommendation from the recent cultural review that very clearly said that should happen. So that's a very important call out, Monique. Just before we finish up, I just last invitation to put any questions that you might have for our panelists into the Q&A tab on the Teams platform. I just wanted to touch on, it's been touched on a couple of times, but this issue of contact with family and community, which, as we know, is integral to people's identity, wellbeing, preparation for life after prison. And yet across Victoria, as we've talked about, these ongoing lockdowns, staffing shortages are making it harder for people to stay connected. And I think, as Kelly was noting, for First Nations people, connection to country and to kin carries an additional importance and significance. So Kelly, what are the biggest barriers that are preventing people from staying connected to family, community, mob while in prison?
Well, there's a whole range of things, but I mean, one of the first things that gets cancelled is visits. So you have, there's no staffing for the visits, so your visits will get cancelled, that kind of thing. Strip searching is another thing. People aren't wanting to go 2 visits. Well, I don't want my parents to go to a visit and have to be like, strip searched, and I don't certainly want to be strip searched on the way in and out. Like I'm already harmed by you imagine coming from solitary confinement for 3 months and then wanting to go to a visit to your family, then to be strip searched and strip searched on the way out and go back to your solitary. It's horrible. It really deters that. And then we know that when you have no contact with the family and friends, and then you have no phone use, so you're isolating more, so paranoia kicks in more, and it's just like a really vicious kind of circle that you get involved in. And prison's not the environment to stay connected to family and friends. It's just not. Like I remember when I first went in, my mum spent the first 6 months crying on the phone, and I mean that's above all those other conditions, having that, it's just not a place for people to be.
And Kelly, we've got a question from Bess. And hi, Bess. I should have acknowledged at the start, Bess is also very instrumental in getting this resource across the line. So thank you so much for all of your work, Bess. And Bess has said it would be great to hear from you how a resource like this, Prison Law Handbook, might have assisted you or other people who were in similar situation during your time in imprisonment.
Yeah, I was very creative about how I got information. Obviously, the guards aren't very forthcoming with that, but I was very creative. I still managed to get some information. But having the Prison Law Handbook, we just create so many like streamlined responses. So, maybe I know something and then I would share it with somebody else. But if there's a tool that people can go to and be like, get all of the same information, I really feel like that's a way to empower, women especially. I can't speak for the men's system, but I know when, DPFC, there is no information about, like, if you're lucky enough to get your hands on the LOPs and they tell you they're in the legal library, they're not. They don't exist.
Sorry, what are LOPs for our audience?
So every prison runs under a set of rules, like guidelines, and that's called the local operating procedures. In privately owned prisons, it's called the operations manual, I think, which is like a set of policies and procedures that they need that govern how they act, how they treat people, how their code of conduct. Again, doesn't really exist. They don't really do that. So it's basically just a big pile of paperwork that no one knows about and no one follows. So I've had conversations with prison officers before about what's in the LOPs that they need to be following, and they're like, "Oh no, that's not." So I don't know how useful they are, but having the Prison Law Handbook available to people or women that are in prison, the women can refer to that and be like, "No, look, this is the information in here." I'm sure there'll still be officers that are like, "No, that's not," but it does give the women some strength behind what they're saying to make them feel confident, because I can tell you now, when you go in there, you start thinking this behavior that you're subjected to is normal. Some of the stuff that happened to me just became normal routine. And then when I got out and started talking about it, people are like, that's not normal. Like, this is not normal behavior. The way they speak to you, the way they treat you, just the things they do to aggravate, like, these are not normal behaviors. And I think if you had something like the Prison Law Handbook, you could really refer to that and be like, no, this is not okay.
Yeah, I think if I can summarize what you're saying, I think it's that information is power, right? Knowledge is power, and that's why they're controlling it. But so we do have to give kudos to corrections who have whitelisted this website so that prisoners will have access to it. So credit where it's due. But yeah, it's so important, because without information, people are powerless. So it sounds self-serving, but a very important resource for that reason. There's a couple more questions in the chat. One about whether the handbook would be made available for people on remand. I have to take that one on notice. It's a great question. And as we see with the bail law reforms, it's an increasing cohort of people. So we're trying to make it available to as many people as possible, but we'll get back to you. Thanks, Ruby. Great question. And there's a question for you, Sophie. I don't know if you'll be able to answer it, or maybe Monique. Someone's asking about, is there a way for family and friends who don't have access to alerts, etc., to be able to find out where a loved one is when they've disappeared into custody?
Yeah, look, I think that the short answer is no, which is also something that needs to be massively looked at. From my experience as a lawyer, yeah, the only time that I'm aware of people is when I get notifications from health. I know that VALs will have their own, and I haven't worked at VAL, so maybe if someone's in the chat, they might know more than me, but VALs have a system when an Aboriginal person is in custody. But other than that, my understanding is that there's pretty limited. And Kelly, do you think is maybe even the VAL system? I'm not sure if you have more insight on that than me.
Yeah, so VALs have the police have a legal obligation to notify VALs, when an Aboriginal person goes into custody. I don't know too much more other than that about it, but yeah, they need to be it needs to be reported to VALs.
Great. Well, very unfortunately, we're at time. I'd love to be able to talk to you guys all day about this such important insights. Thank you in particular to Kelly. I know you hear this a lot, but it's just always, it's so powerful and generous when people share their lived experience, and it's such an important contribution. So both apologise for what happened to you in prison, but also thank you for sharing it and helping us out with your comments today. Thanks, Monique, expert legal advice and passion, as well to Sophie. Thank you to our audience for the huge attendance and interest in the Prison Law Handbook, and a big thank you to everyone who's been involved in producing it over the years, and to everyone who brought this webinar together today, in particular to Mia Tinkler and also to Gabby, who you heard from earlier. So with that, I will officially declare the Prison Law Handbook launched, and really look forward to prisoners being able to use it. So hopefully we can see a reduction in some of these issues that we've been talking about today, that very unfortunately, based on what we've been talking about, will only become a larger issue the more people we have in prison. So everyone keep up the conversation, keep up the fight. It's so important. You've heard from Kelly what it's actually like to be in prison and to be disempowered and have no information. So please keep pressing for change, and thank you very much for your attendance.